The desert does not whisper. It watches. On a wind-hunted Wyoming night, Clara Johnson opened her door to a man running from death, and in doing so, reopened a life she had buried with her husband 3 years before. Elias Boone was not just injured, he was hunted. One night became two. Two became a stand against men who believed fear could buy land and silence truth. Gunfire came. Justice followed, but peace. Peace demanded more than survival. Years passed. Love arrived late but honest. And when the land was threatened again, not by bullets, but by paper, Clara and Elias stood their ground one final time. Not as fugitives, not as widows, but as owners of their lives. The wind still crossed the plains, but it no longer hunted. The desert does not whisper, it watches. It waits for the weak to falter, for the lonely to open their doors at the wrong hour. And on one wind-slashed night, when grief had almost finished its work, Clara Johnson opened hers anyway. The Wyoming wind did not simply blow across the land. It hunted. It slipped beneath collars, clawed at skin, carried warnings no man ignored twice. Elias Boone had lived with that. Wind long enough to know the difference between weather and the scrape of dread. Along his spine, on nights like this, the land remembered every mistake ever made upon it. The cabin glowed faint behind him, firelight trembling like a living thing, while outside the darkness pressed close, thick with dust and memory. Inside that cabin years later, Clara would still remember how the wind sounded when everything changed. She stood on the porch alone, a solitary figure wrapped in a wool cloak that smelled of smoke and old winters. At 56, Clara Johnson wore her years openly. Her dark skin bore the quiet record of sun and labor, of seasons endured without complaint. Her eyes, black and steady, still held the fire of someone who had survived loss and refused to kneel to it. 3 years earlier, she had buried her husband beneath the rise behind the house. Since then, the Double J Ranch had known only her footsteps, the creak of boards and the thin, lonely cries of cattle that outnumbered hands. At her hip, beneath the cloak, rested the cold certainty of a revolver. Clara had learned a simple truth after midnight visits turned bad. Men who came late rarely brought mercy with them. The wind rose, sweeping white dust across the yard, curling around the moon like smoke. Then another sound cut through the howl, hoofbeats, hard, urgent, not the wandering rhythm of a drifter, passing wide, but the desperate thunder of a warning racing straight at her door. Clara straightened, fingers brushing the grip of her gun. A dark shape broke free of the night. The horse staggered, mane slick with sweat, foam flecking its mouth. It lurched to a halt at the foot of the porch, sides heaving. The rider sagged low in the saddle, shoulders broad even in collapse, had dragged down to hide his face. Blood soaked his left sleeve, black in the moonlight. Clara did not move. The stranger lifted his head. Beneath the brim, his eyes caught the moon, cold, sharp, unmistakably alive. They were the eyes of a man who had stood face with death more than once, and refused to stay down. "Ma'am?" he rasped, voice torn raw by dust and distance. "Name's Elias Boone. My horse is finished. I'm not far behind." Her grip tightened. He slid from the saddle and nearly fell, catching himself on the porch rail. In the pale light, scars marked his face, old and honest, and fresh blood ran slow from his arm. "I ask nothing more than a place to lie out the night," he said. "I'll work, pay come morning. Just need water and a roof." Clara studied him, measuring every breath. Since Tom's death, no man had crossed this threshold. Love and want had been laid in the ground with her husband's coffin. At her age, desire was meant to be a memory, not a threat. And yet this stranger, worn, dangerous, carrying the weight of things, unspoken, pulled at something inside. Her she had sworn was dead. Their eyes held, only a moment, long enough. The desert wind struck her face, sharp as a blade. She breathed deep. "You're bleeding." A thin smile tugged at his mouth, half defiance, half gratitude. "Just a scrape. Worst of it's behind me." She did not answer. Her hand stayed close to the gun, but she did not draw. Outside, the horse whimpered and dropped its head spent. The sound stirred something like pity, like recognition. Slowly, Clara let her hand fall. Not trust, not yet, but not refusal either. She stepped aside and pushed open the weathered door. The hinges groaned, long and loud, as if protesting the choice. "Come in," she said. "One night only." Elias dipped his head, a pilgrim granted shelter. His shadow stretched across the porch as he crossed the line. Clara had guarded for 3 years. From that moment on, she would never remember the house the same way again. The wind howled outside, furious at being shut out. Inside, the oil lamp cast a trembling gold across the walls. Elias stepped in, boots heavy on the floor, shoulders nearly brushing the low rafters. He carried with him the scent of leather, gunpowder, sweat and blood, life, hard and unsoftened. "Thank you," he said, rough as gravel. He moved forward, then faltered, bracing on the table. Blood dripped from his sleeve, darkening the wood. Clara's practicality woke at once. 3 years alone had taught her to fix what broke. Fences, bones, herself. She set the revolver down, filled a basin with water, and drew a clean cloth. "Sit," she said. Elias obeyed without argument. The chair creaked beneath him. She worked in silence, pulling the torn fabric aside. The wound was not fatal, but it was deep enough to matter. As she cleaned it, her fingers brushed his skin. The contact was brief, accidental, yet her hands betrayed her with a faint tremor. He noticed. "Been a long time since anyone tended me," he said quietly. "Then keep quiet and let me finish," Clara replied, sharper than she intended. His eyes lifted to her face, dark, steady, seeing too much. She dropped her gaze, focused on the task, on the cloth, on the knot she tied tight around his arm. When she finished, she drew back fast, as if burned. "That'll hold," she said. Elias tested his shoulder. "You're skilled. Learn to survive," she answered. She carried the bloody water out and returned to find him pulling on his shirt, leaving it open enough to reveal an old scar across his chest. His eyes drifted to the faded photograph on the wall. Tom, younger, proud beside a bay horse. Elias said nothing. He only nodded, as if the silence told him all he needed. "You'll take the spare room," Clara said. "Out back." "One night," he repeated. As he passed her, the space between them narrowed to the width of a breath. His presence filled it. He paused, as if on the edge of saying more, then only nodded and disappeared into the dark room. Clara sat at the table long after, her gaze fixed on the blood-stained cloth. She pressed a hand to her chest, heart beating too fast, and wondered why she had opened the door at all. Dawn came quietly, bleeding color into the horizon. Clara rose from a night of restless half-sleep and stepped onto the porch. Elias stood in the yard, bare to the waist, swinging an axe through dry logs. Each stroke was sure, controlled. Sweat gleamed on his shoulders like dew. She stopped, hand on the doorframe, caught by the sight of a man doing work she had done alone for years. He glanced up and smiled, honest and unguarded. "Figured I'd earn my stay." Heat rose to her cheeks. She turned away, busying herself with coffee. When she returned, the wood was stacked neat. Their fingers brushed as she handed him a cup. The contact sparked, brief and startling. They drank in silence. The morning wind carried the scent of damp earth. "You didn't have to," she said at last. "I don't carry debts well," he replied. "Work reminds me I'm still worth something." His gaze held hers. Something tightened in her chest. After breakfast, they worked the corral. One mare spooked, reins snapping tight. Elias stepped in, voice low, hand gentle. The animal calmed beneath his touch. "You know horses," Clara said. "They know hurt," he answered simply. The day unfolded in small moments, hands brushing, glances held too long. By nightfall, the sound of his axe rang steady against the walls, a rhythm that settled something long restless inside her. On the porch that evening, Clara spoke of Tom, of sickness and silence. Elias listened without interruption, bearing the weight with her. When he spoke of drought and loss, she saw her own grief mirrored in his. The storm came fast that afternoon. Rain slammed the earth, thunder rolling low and heavy. On the porch, Elias draped his coat around her shoulders. Their fingers touched. Lightning split the sky, and for a breath neither moved. Night fell hard. The storm raged. Inside, the distance between them collapsed under the weight of what had been building since the door first opened. When Elias spoke her name, it landed like a vow. Clara's fear gave way to truth. The kiss came with the thunder, soft, then fierce, years of hunger breaking loose. In the shelter of the small room, time bent. H fell away. Loss loosened its grip. Two souls long starved reached for one another with reverence and fire, finding life where they had thought only endings remained. When the storm eased, Clara lay against him, listening to his heart steady and real beneath her cheek. For the first time in years, she did not feel alone. Outside, rain softened to a lullaby. Inside, something had begun that neither the wind nor time could undo. Part 2. Morning did not arrive gently. It crept in cautious and pale, as if unsure it was welcome. Clara woke first. For a moment she lay still, listening, not to the wind, not to the groan of the house, but to the slow, steady breathing beside her. Elias slept on his back, one arm bent above his head, the other resting near her shoulder without touching it, as if even in sleep he feared crossing a line. The sight tightened something in her chest. She had not shared a bed since Tom died. Not warmth, not weight, not the quiet truth of another body reminding her she was still alive. And now here it was, unasked, undeniable, dangerous. Clara slipped from the bed and dressed quickly, hands betraying her with a faint shake. She told herself it was the chill. She told herself many things. Outside, dawn washed the land in soft grey. The storm had done its work well. The dust lay settled, the air clean, the earth dark and breathing. Clara set water to boil, grounding herself in routine, coffee, bread, normal things. Things that did not demand answers. Behind her, floorboards creaked. Elias stood in the doorway. Shirt pulled on but unbuttoned, hair dark and unruly from sleep. His eyes met hers, searching, not claiming. "Morning," he said quietly. "Coffee's almost ready," she replied too quickly. They sat across from one another, the table suddenly too small for what lay between them. Steam curled up from the mugs, filling the silence. At last, Elias spoke. "I won't insult you by pretending last night didn't happen." Clara met his gaze. "And I won't insult myself by regretting it." Relief flickered across his face, but it did not erase the tension. He leaned back slightly, giving her space. "Still," he said, "I told you one night." "Yes," she said. "You did." They drank. The words hovered, heavy. Elias rose and reached for his coat. "I'll be gone by noon. Horse won't make it, but I can walk south. There's a rail stop 2 days out." The finality in his tone struck harder than she expected. "That wound isn't ready," she said. "I've carried worse." She stood, anger flaring bright and sudden. "This isn't about pride. You'll tear it open." His eyes softened. "Clara, I don't stay places. I don't belong to them." "And what about last night?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Elias looked away, jaw tightening. "That's exactly why I have to go." Silence fell again, thick as the clouds had been. He worked anyway, mending a broken rail, hauling water, setting right what he could. Clara watched, from a distance, torn between relief and loss. By midday, his pack was ready. He paused at the porch, hat in hand. "Thank you. For everything." She nodded, afraid to speak. He took 3 steps away, then stopped. "There's something you should know," he said without turning. "Men aren't looking for me because of money. Or theft." Clara's heart thudded. "I testified against a cattle syndicate down south. They've been burning out small ranches, killing families who wouldn't sell. I put names to it, faces, since then." He shrugged. "I don't stop moving." He turned now. "If I stay, that danger stays with you." Understanding hit her like cold water. "That's why you came running," she said. "Not just wounded, hunted." "Yes." She looked out at her land, the fences she'd held together alone, the cattle that were all she had left, the grave on the rise. She had survived grief, loneliness, fear. What she had not survived was nothing. "You don't get to decide that for me," she said quietly. Elias frowned. "Clara?" "This land has tested me every day since Tom died. If danger wants me, it knows where I am." She stepped closer. "But I won't turn away someone just because the world is cruel." His voice dropped. "They won't stop." "Neither will I." They stood inches apart, the wind lifting her hair, tugging at his coat like a warning. "Stay," she said. Not as a plea, as a choice. Elias searched her face, seeing the truth there, the steel beneath the kindness. At last he exhaled, slow and heavy. "If I stay," he said, "I stay fully. I don't half-guard things I care about." "Good," Clara replied. because I don't half-live anymore. That night, a rider passed the far ridge. Clara saw the dust plume from the porch. Elias saw it too. "They've found me," he said. "No," she answered, steady. "They've found us." The trap was sprung 2 nights later. Men came at dawn, 3 of them, rifles slung low, confidence heavy in their saddles. They rode straight through the gate as if it already belonged to them. Elias stepped out first, gun in hand but lowered. Clara stood beside him, shotgun resting easy against her shoulder. "You Elias Boone?" The lead man called. "I am." "You're coming with us." "No," Elias said calmly. The man laughed. "Then we burn this place to the ground." Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. "You'll do no such thing." The men glanced at her, surprised. One sneered. "Ma'am, step aside." She did not. The standoff stretched thin as wire. The first shot came from the ridge. A crack, a scream. One rider fell from his horse. Chaos exploded. Elias moved fast, too fast for a wounded man. Clara fired once, clean and sure, shattering a rifle stock. Horses reared, men shouted. Another shot rang out from the hills, then another. Within moments, it was over. 2 men fled. One lay bleeding in the dirt. From the ridge emerged 3 riders wearing badges dulled by dust and miles. U.S. Marshals. The syndicate man was bound and dragged away, cursing. Elias stood stunned. The marshal tipped his hat to Clara. "Ma'am, you did good holding your ground." She nodded, pulse still racing. Later, as the sun climbed, Elias turned to her. "I didn't know they were that close." "You don't get to outrun justice forever," she said softly. He looked at her then, not as shelter, not as escape, but as something solid. "What happens now?" he asked. Clara took his hand, firm and warm. "Now we rebuild, together." The wind swept across the land again, but this time it did not hunt. It passed through open ground, carrying the sound of 2 lives choosing to stand instead of run. The land remembered violence longer than men did. Even after the marshals disappeared into the south road with their prisoner, the silence they left behind felt uneasy, like a held breath that had not yet decided whether to exhale. Clara stood at the edge of the yard, watching dust settle back into the soil as if nothing had happened at all. Elias moved through the ranch with a new awareness now, not as a guest, not as a man passing through, but as someone who had chosen to stay where blood had nearly been spilled. That choice weighed heavy. For days, neither of them spoke much about the shooting. They spoke, instead of fences, of calving season, of how the east pasture might hold more water after the storm. Work became their language. Repair became prayer. Elias rose before dawn, favoring his healing arm less each morning. Clara noticed the way he walked the perimeter at night, how he counted shadows and listened to the wind as if it might speak. She did not ask him to stop. Some habits were born of survival, not fear. One evening, as the sun bled red across the plains, Elias stopped by the grave on the rise. Clara watched from a distance. He removed his hat and stood there a long time. When he returned, his eyes were rimmed with something raw. "I told him thank you," Elias said quietly. "For what?" Clara asked. "For loving you first." Her throat tightened, but she nodded. That night they spoke at last. Not of danger, not of enemies, but of years lost to loneliness. Elias told her of towns he never stayed in, of faces he never let himself remember. Clara spoke of nights when the house felt too big, of setting 2 plates by habit and realizing there was no one to fill the second. They did not promise forever. They promised honesty. Winter came early. Snow rolled in thick and unforgiving, sealing the land beneath white silence. The cattle were moved, the house sealed tight. Nights grew long. The fire burned low. In that closeness, they learned each other fully. Strengths, fears, old wounds that still ached when the cold set in. Then the letter came. It arrived with a rider bearing a federal seal. Elias read it once, then again, jaw set. "They want me to testify again," he said. "Bigger trial. More names." Clara understood immediately what it meant. Public, permanent. "A final end to running? And if you go?" she asked. "I won't be able to come back for a long while. Maybe ever." She nodded slowly. "But if you don't go, they'll keep hunting," he finished. That night, Clara sat alone at the table long after the fire died. She stared at the grain in the wood, the same table where she had once bound his wound. She knew this pain, the quiet kind that came before loss. At dawn, she made her choice. She saddled his horse. Elias found her in the yard, breath caught halfway between protest and gratitude. "You're sending me away," he said. "No," she answered, tightening the cinch. "I'm letting you finish what you started." She pressed something into his hand, Tom's old pocket watch, worn smooth with years. "So, you remember where time stopped running from you," she said. Elias swallowed hard. "I don't deserve this." "Neither did I," Clara replied. "And yet here we are." They did not kiss goodbye. They held foreheads together, breathing the same cold air, memorizing the weight of it. Then Elias rode south. Months passed. Spring returned slowly, teasing green from frozen ground. Clara worked the ranch alone again, but she was not the same woman. She carried strength differently now, not as armor, but as certainty. Then one morning hoofbeats came up the drive. She did not reach for her gun. Elias dismounted at the gate, thinner, older, but free. His eyes held peace for the first time she had seen.
"It's done," he said.
"They're finished." Clara stepped forward. "And you?" He smiled. "I'm home, if you'll have me." She did not answer with words. Years later, travelers spoke of the Double J Ranch differently. They said it was a place where storms broke before they reached the house, where a woman who had buried her past and a man who had outrun, he stood side by side, unbowed. The wind still came, but it no longer hunted. It passed through open ground, carrying the sound of laughter, of hoofbeats that belonged, of a life reclaimed, not in youth but in truth. Time did not soften the land. It refined the people who learned how to stand on it. 5 years passed over the Double J Ranch, like slow-moving clouds, bringing drought, rain, and the kind of peace that only comes after blood has dried into memory. Clara's hair silvered at the temples. Elias carried more lines around his eyes. Neither tried to hide the years. They had earned them. The ranch grew steadier, profitable even. Neighbors stopped by. Children rode past the fence. Laughter returned to a place that once only knew wind and grief. And that was when trouble came again. Not with guns, with paper. One afternoon, a black carriage arrived, clean wheels, city dust on its sides. A man stepped down wearing a pressed coat and a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. He carried documents sealed in red wax. "Clara Johnson," he said. "Elias Boone." Elias felt it immediately, that old tightening in his chest. The feeling that said, nothing good ever announces itself this neatly. The man cleared his throat. "The land your ranch sits on has been reclassified under a new federal expansion act. Railway interests have laid claim. You'll be compensated." Clara did not take the papers. "This land was paid for in blood and years," she said. "Not for sale." The man's smile thinned. "You misunderstand. Sale is not required." That night the fire burned low. Elias paced. Clara sat still. "I've fought men," Elias said. "I don't know how to fight ink." Clara finally looked at him. "You already did once." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a weathered folder. Deeds. Affidavits, letters. Evidence Elias had helped gather years earlier, forgotten by the world, but not by her. They took small ranches. "Because they thought we didn't understand the law," she said. "They were wrong. The fight took months. Courtrooms instead of gunsmoke, words instead of bullets." Elias testified again, older now, steadier. Clara spoke once, only once, and the room went silent when she did. The ruling came down on a dry summer morning. The land stayed theirs. Outside the courthouse, Elias exhaled like a man finally setting something down. "I ran my whole life," he said. "Turns out the bravest thing I ever did was stop." Clara slipped her hand into his. "And stay." That evening, they stood on the porch as the sun dipped low. The wind crossed the plains, gentle now, almost respectful. Elias glanced at her. "You ever think about what comes next?" She smiled, slow, knowing. "Same thing as always, tomorrow." He laughed softly. The land did not care about age, or past sins, or how late in life love arrived. It only cared whether you stood your ground. And at the Double J Ranch, 2 people did, until the wind itself learned to pass them by.